Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Create and Consume, a podcast about what we make, watch, and buy in the era of digital content. I'm your host, Austen Tosone. As someone who grew up watching movies like The Devil Wears Prada and Confessions of a Shopaholic, I was just convinced that working at a magazine was the coolest job ever. Not to mention, my mom was actually a magazine editor. Not sure how many people know that. So I just wanted to work for a magazine more than anything. As someone who grew up reading, Teen Vogue, Cosmo Girl, 17, I was so thrilled when I was able to start interning in college. I actually interned at four different publications when I was in college: Marie Claire, Nylon, Cosmo, and New York Magazine. After graduating, I went on to work as an editor at Nylon and also an editor at Interview magazine. But how does a magazine actually get made? I don't know about you, but as much as I love print magazines, I very rarely buy them anymore, and I'm honestly worried this is going to become a lost art. So I really wanted to put together this episode while I still remember everything very clearly to share with you exactly how a print magazine comes to life. Before we get into today's topic, let's do a little create and consume. So this week I was shooting a holiday brand deal for Pinterest that I can't wait to share with you soon. And I also have been working on some more long form content for my YouTube channel. I just uploaded a video that actually took me almost 2 months to put together, which was really exciting. And I've got some fun vlogs and end of year content planned too. And then, as far as what I am consuming this week, I think I have a new favorite vlogger. Her name is Amber Burns, and she is based out of Philly. I have been watching her vlogs for a few weeks now after getting in touch with her on Threads, and I'm kind of convinced we're friends. Like, she gives off that kind of vibe, and it's just very like cozy, relatable content that I am absolutely loving and enjoying. But she does a lot of exploring neighborhoods in Philly. She does a lot of reading and book content, which I've been enjoying. And right now, she has fewer than 10,000 subscribers. So now is a great time to become a fan of hers before she blows up, which I suspect will happen relatively soon. She is also doing Vlogmas this year. I think she's either doing like 12 or 14 days of Vlogmas. So if you're craving that long form content, definitely go check her out. I'm not able to make Vlogmas work on my channel this year, but if you were interested, I did just want to say that I think my 2018 Vlogmas, where I actually was able to do 24 videos, is probably some of my most like fun and just like relatable videos where you really get a look at every single day in my life. So if you are craving any Vlogmas content and you want to live in, the pre-pandemic world again for a minute, maybe check out that playlist. I'll link it down below, and Amber's channel too, of course, in case you are in need of any of that cozy content. As always, be sure to let me know what you're creating and consuming as well. You can leave comments on YouTube if that's where you're watching this episode, on our Instagram or TikTok. You could even send me an email or a DM, however you most would prefer to reach out. With that being said, let's get into today's topic. And like I alluded to at the beginning of the episode, I am just so worried that this is going to become a totally lost art. And I really wanted to share the process of how a magazine actually got made based on my time and experience as a magazine editor. So, as you guys know, I worked for both Nylon and Interview. I worked for Nylon for a year and a half, and then I was at Interview magazine for 8 months. I'm going to primarily focus this episode on my experience as an editor at Nylon because I had, more than double the time there that I had at Interview, and I was also more involved in actually putting together the issue in my role at Nylon. And just to recap, I started working at Nylon in June of 2016, so right after I graduated from Barnard, and I worked there until September 2017. And then Nylon was actually purchased by Bustle Digital Group in 2019. So because they laid off the print magazine staff in 2017, the last issue that we put out was our October 2017 issue, which has St. Vincent on the cover. So that was the last print issue in this version of how we made a magazine that I am able to reference. So I can't speak to anything post 2017. Okay, so back when I was working at Nylon, we would put out 10 issues a year. So we would do an issue every month, and we would have two combined issues. June, July was a combined issue, and then December, January was a combined issue. And this usually worked out well because the summer and the end of the kind of quote unquote holiday season are typically more slow times for, I would say, everybody, for retail, for, shopping and all of those types of things, and also for news and new announcements and things like that. So at the time, it made sense to combine those two issues together. So we would ultimately end up with 10 issues a year. We also did, partway through 2017, start to kind of revamp and revive Nylon Guys, which actually used to be its own print issue. It had its own print issue when I was an intern at Nylon, which, what year would that have been? Either 2014 or 2015. I can't remember which one. But basically, we would have like a small insert inside a regular Nylon issue that was maybe like 20 or 30 pages. That was our Nylon Guys section when we were trying to revive it. And quite a lot of our issues kind of had a central theme or kind of storyline surrounding them. So this made it really easy to put together story ideas or to kind of go in with an angle already in mind versus just it could be like a hodgepodge of different content. I always found it really helpful whenever we had a theme for an issue because it was helpful in terms of knowing what to expect from that issue and pitching the right ideas and kind of just all being on the same wavelength. So, for example, what I mean by that is March and September were always our fashion issues. So March would be like a spring fashion preview, and September would be a fall fashion preview. Some of the other ones that I can remember from the collection of magazines that I have here in the apartment, which are right on top of this bookshelf if you're watching on YouTube, they are always here in the background as we're chatting. Some of the other issue themes were in April, we would usually do the beauty issue. In May, we would do a young Hollywood issue. June, July was typically our music issue. August would be the denim issue, which was always fun as kind of like a back to school nod. In October, we would have an It Girl issue. And then in November, we had the America issue. I guess time to the election, which totally makes sense now that I am putting two and two together. And we would often select our cover stars based on if there was some kind of tie-in or project or thing that they were working on that would come out that month. So to use a recent example, if we were just putting out our December, January issue, I would have high suspicions that maybe we would try to get like Ariana Grande or Cynthia Erivo on the cover because of Wicked. The first September issue that I worked on when I started at Nylon had Winona Ryder on the cover, and that was when Stranger Things first came out. So the cover star always had to be a big enough name to be on the cover and grab attention and be recognizable. And also, they would typically have some kind of tie in either to the theme of the issue we were working on or to a project that they were working on that we would kind of like, coordinate with their publicist to say, everyone's going to be talking about this month. So this is the month that would make the most sense for this person to appear on the cover. Some other cover stars from issues I worked on include Lizzie Kaplan, Rowan Blanchard, Gabri Sidibe, Lena Dunham, and so many more. So that's kind of the general theme and vibe of like top level what a calendar year in a magazine would look like and what that actually entails. So that's just sort of a top level overview of what a calendar year in the magazine would typically look like. And in terms of just understanding the different departments within a magazine, I thought it would be helpful to break those down. So the kind of core of everything is really the editorial department. And this is the department that I worked in. When I first got hired at Nylon, I was the editorial assistant, and after 6 months, I was promoted to assistant editor. The editorial department is essentially responsible for conceptualizing, writing, assigning, and editing all of the big stories in the publication. I'll get into more details about this later on, but the kind of key people within the editorial department at Nylon when I worked there were me, a senior editor, the features director, and our editor-in-chief. That was kind of like the core four, if you will. And yes, there were four of us. Nylon was a small indie publication, so we were super scrappy. We were often working in a very tight-knit group, so we obviously got to know each other super well, and we also hired, freelance writers and things like that to kind of help us cover more ground because there's only so much that the four of us could do on our own. In addition to the editorial department, we also had a fashion department and a beauty department. And if you want any indication of how small Nylon was, for I think the first full year that I worked there, our beauty department was just our beauty director. I actually don't know how she juggled and managed everything. She ultimately was able to hire like another beauty editor underneath her, but it wasn't long before that Nylon folded. So the fashion and the beauty departments were responsible for those sections of the issue each month. So I would say there were typically more fashion shoots each month compared to beauty. Beauty obviously had its own dedicated section of the magazine, but fashion would feature several market pages in the front of the issue. It would feature a couple of different photo shoots, and they would also be looped in with the cover shoot, and specifically like which brands and which pieces and things like that were featured on the actual cover of the magazine, because that was a really big moment. And to have the department heads kind of weigh in on stuff like that, particularly I would say for the March and September issues, that was always really helpful. So within the fashion and beauty departments, they were constantly, calling in samples either of products or clothing to shoot and feature in the publication. With fashion, often the items would get returned right after back to the publicists or whatever company was loaning out the clothing to us. With beauty, unless it was like, I don't know, maybe like a really expensive LED mask or something, it was not really expected to return the product. So that created the beauty free bin at Nylon, which is actually how I would say I first got into beauty, was really like suddenly having access to all of these incredible products that, not for nothing, but on my assistant editor's salary, I would not have had access to otherwise. Another hugely important part of the magazine was the art department. So, this included our design director, who would be responsible for layout and actually submitting the issue to the printer, as well as the photo team, who would be responsible for booking photographers for any in house shoots we were doing, as well as casting, models and things like that for all of our shoots. And lastly, we had a sales department. I would say I know the least about this, but basically they would be responsible for finding advertisers to buy out either full page or half page ads in the magazine, and occasionally do like branded or sponsored content packages, although I would say that was more rare for print back in 2016, 2017, but they were definitely getting into it more with the digital team. Nylon, of course, also had a digital team. That's not really relevant to this episode, but they were responsible for all of the website content, which now is the only platform that they publish on. So, to start from the beginning, let's say that as of right now, at the time I'm recording this, this is December. So, at this point, we would probably be brainstorming and planning out our February issue. Usually, when we would first sit down for a brainstorming session for a new issue, it would have already been decided by kind of upper management who the cover star was going to be for that issue. And again, if we had a theme for that month's issue, we would be factoring in that to our ideas and our pitches as well. Sometimes I would say too, we would have an idea of someone who we would want to do like a smaller in magazine profile on versus a cover story. And publicists were starting to get more and more picky with things like that the more that I worked at Nylon. For example, in the February 2017 issue that I recently looked back in while I was planning out this episode, I saw we had a very small back of book feature on Dua Lipa. Whereas today, Dua Lipa would definitely be a cover only type of person, meaning her publicists wouldn't be interested in her taking the time to do anything less than a cover, because now she's got that clout, she's got that notoriety, she is a lot more coveted and she is a lot more recognized now. So sometimes we would run into issues where we would really want to profile someone who obviously had a lot of name recognition and would be great to profile, but if they weren't interested in being a smaller in book story, sometimes we would have to wait and kind of bide our time and figure out what the right move for stuff like that was. So, anyway, for the top of a new issue, we would all get together and have a pitch meeting, and we would come to that pitch meeting with story ideas in mind for the sections that we would manage. And I'll circle back on the sections I managed in a little bit. If we had maybe two ideas for one particular section, we might bring both and kind of just get a pulse check from the room to see what people thought would be the most interesting or the most worth pursuing. In general, I always tried to come to these pitch meetings with like a plan A and then a plan B. Usually I would be pretty confident about my plan A's. And as you know, the more I worked at the magazine, the more often my first idea would get approved for me to move forward with. But every once in a while, someone might say, that's not really the right fit for something like this, or we actually just did something similar 2 issues ago. So maybe we need to change it up a little bit more. So I always tried to come with my primary pitch that I felt the most strongly about, but also like a backup pitch just in case the stars weren't aligning for some reason. Also, I'm just here to say that quite a lot of my rejected pitches for Nylon, whether they were for print or digital, which I sometimes contributed to when I had extra time, became blog posts. So if you read my blog from like the 2016 and 2017 posts, if you see some stuff in there that seems like, oh, maybe this could have been in a magazine, it could have been, but they said no, so I self-published. That's also what I loved about having the blog as an outlet, was I was sort of never left like unsatisfied as a writer or an editor. When I had an idea that I liked, even if it wasn't a fit for Nylon, I was still kind of always able to follow through on it on my own. After our initial pitch meeting, where we would have, our stories all ready to go and we would have ideas for who we wanted to write them, then we would leave that meeting and start reaching out to, for the features director, she would be able to reach out to freelance writers who she could commission to work with for her stories. As the assistant editor, I didn't necessarily feel like I had that much budget to work with on my side of things. So for a lot of my sections, either I would end up writing some of the stuff or I would choose to assign it out to my interns, which I loved doing because it meant that they were able to get bylines in Nylon print even before they actually were employees, either, at Nylon or at another publication. And we would usually have exactly a month to put together an issue, and we would always inevitably end up right at the printer deadline. Like, I spent a lot of late nights at Nylon, especially the first year that I worked there, because Nylon did not have a managing editor, which is something Interview did have, which is why I can kind of speak more to the Nylon process and less to the Interview process, because a managing editor, by the way, is a very important part of a print magazine. It's basically the person who keeps everyone on task, makes sure that deadlines are set, and honestly, sometimes even sets like fake earlier deadlines so that, the things that happened at Nylon a lot, which were like sometimes staying at the office till 10 or 11 trying to finish an issue, didn't happen as much at Interview. So much of it, honestly, in my eyes, especially as like a 22-year-old who was, living in Williamsburg and commuting to her magazine job in Soho, was for the plot. Like, of course, oh, guys, I was at the office till 10 p.m. closing an issue. Like, that was the drama. That was the magazine career that I had in my head that I was going to be a part of for a very long time. I would say that this happened the least with our February issue and our August issue, because the month prior to that would have been June, July, and December, January. So the fact that we had those 2 months combined meant that we had a little extra time for like the February and the August issues that would follow. And when it comes to the breakdown of the magazine, certain editors basically owned different pages and sections depending on, number one, their seniority, like on the masthead, and number two, their interests. And if you're not familiar with the masthead, that is the page in the magazine where everyone's names are listed and their positions are listed. And if you look at a masthead, there is a pretty clear hierarchy to it. So obviously the editor-in-chief is going to be at the top, and then depending on the different departments, they kind of list their names out in terms of most senior to least senior. A little bit of an antiquated system, to be honest, but that's just how it all was at the time. So in terms of the sections of the magazine and what I managed, I was the assistant editor, so I was the lowest man on the totem pole, so to speak, for the editorial department. And they did a great job of making sure that I was still able to, speak to my interests and manage sections that I was very interested in. But that also meant that a lot of the grunt work, so to speak, landed on me. So I also managed a lot of pages of the magazine that you don't think are actually that important, but are kind of essential to the whole book being put together. As the assistant editor, the first section that I oversaw was fashion news, which I was so excited to be a part of, even though I wouldn't necessarily be involved in fashion features or just styled editorial shoots. This gave me a way to still connect with the fashion department and have my editorial spin on it. And I was also in charge of the arts section of Culture Club, which was a section in the back of Nylon magazine that basically touched on all different things culture. So we would have art, music, sometimes we would have books, sometimes we would have food. So anything kind of under that culture umbrella. Those were the two sections that I really got to own and manage, and they were pretty easy to pitch and figure out. Usually for fashion news, the fashion market editor would loop me in and say, here are some pitches of upcoming things that I've gotten. Here's what I'm thinking. And I would usually, also let her know if I had received anything from my end. I started to get more known for fashion related things, even though I wasn't technically in the fashion department. So we would kind of put that list together and present it at a pitch meeting. Usually very little pushback on stuff like that. And then same thing for the arts section. I basically just tried to, get on as many lists for different museums and things like that that I could, so I could check out which exhibitions were going to be coming up in the next few months, kind of select my favorite one, and then I would usually pitch and write that profile myself. Look at that, my art history degree being put to work, and they said it wouldn't be relevant. They were wrong. In addition to fashion news and art, I was also in charge of overseeing several FOB pages. So F of B stands for front of book, and then BOB is, you guessed it, back of book. We'll get to the back of book stuff too, but for the front of book pages, one page that I oversaw was the table of contents. So obviously this is, which stories are on which pages, but I would also be responsible for writing a very short little description for each one of those pages so people had a sense of what the story was actually about. Another page that I oversaw was called Contributors, and this was a really cool thing that Nylon did that I'm sure other magazines did too. I just don't really remember seeing it as frequently, where we would spotlight certain contributors who pitched in for each issue. So typically that would be at least one freelance writer, at least one freelance photographer, and then I feel like everything else was would get swapped in depending on what was most interesting and what stories kind of took up a bulk of the issue or were most important. So that could also involve maybe a freelance illustrator if we had to hire one of those to illustrate a story in the magazine. That's one thing I loved so much about Nylon was the handmade feeling of it all compared to other magazines. Like Nylon was the only magazine I remember reading that had great writing and also doodles in the margins. Sometimes it would also be a model. Sometimes it might be a nail tech or a makeup artist who, pitched in on a big story. Sometimes it could be a fashion stylist. To put together this page, I would reach out to each department each month and say, do you have anyone who you'd like to recommend to be a contributor for this issue? And then I would reach out to either that person directly, or usually if they were a stylist or a makeup artist, I would reach out to their talent management firm, their representation, and just have them answer a few quick, small questions, kind of just like a fun get to know you survey. Things like where they're based, what's their astrology sign, what's their favorite song right now, and then a little blurb about what they worked on for the issue. So I was responsible for all of that outreach, kind of compiling the answers, also getting a photo from everyone, and then submitting that in to the layout for each issue. Another page that I wrote for each issue that I didn't get a byline on just because there was kind of no reason to give me a byline on it. It was just very run of the mill stuff, was the behind the scenes page. So we always had a behind the scenes page for each issue, and it would basically be some kind of outtake or image that didn't make the main story that we shot for the cover. And within the behind the scenes, I would also, again, get quotes from the makeup artist or the stylist for the shoot. And I would just write a little blurb about, let's say it was the Winona Ryder issue. We were leaning into all of the spooky elements here. Obviously, Stranger Things is kind of like a science fiction show. So here's why we chose this outfit. Here's why she had this makeup, all of that type of stuff. So I would just write a little paragraph about that. And that would be, again, something that I was responsible for in each issue. Some of these are just pages that you flip through and you forget that someone is responsible for actually putting them together, which is kind of funny. Nylon also had a page called Par Avion, which was basically our fan mail page. So back when I was an intern, we actually used to get a lot more like handwritten notes from readers, and we would get sometimes like drawings or collages or things like that. So that would be kind of like in our mailbag or, our from the readers page in each issue. By the time I was there as like an editorial assistant slash assistant editor, it was a lot more about like going through Instagram, looking up hashtag nylon mag and seeing if anyone had posted, like a picture of nylon with their cup of coffee. Like pretty much anyone who did that, I was like, screenshot, done. That's going to be in the magazine. And we would like credit their handle and everything. And I think I would also look on Twitter and Tumblr. I feel like back in the day, we also had more stuff like that on Twitter. And I also oversaw the masthead page. So that meant for each issue, I was just making sure everyone's name was spelled right, everyone's name was in the right place. If someone got promoted, making sure their title changed. If someone left the magazine, making sure that, they were on the masthead up until the last issue they worked on, and then we would remove them. And then I would also list out all of our contributing writers who wrote for the issue. Those were all of the key front of book pages that I oversaw and managed. And then, like I said, for fashion news, that was usually pretty early on in the magazine, maybe around page like 20 or 25, if I'm remembering correctly. And like I said, I worked with our fashion market editor on this. So between the two of us, we would say, okay, so let's say there's 8 news items for this month. Maybe one of them is, I've got Wicked on the brain. I still need to see Wicked, but let's just say one of them is, Base Luggage is doing a Wicked collab. So that is going to be, a feature in the fashion news issue. And when I say that, I really mean there's going to be like probably a photo of the luggage and then just a really small paragraph next to it summing up what the collaboration is, where people can get it, when it's dropping, that kind of thing. So that was like a fashion news item. If there were 8 news items, which would be like in a 2-page spread of fashion news, maybe Marissa, who was our market editor, would write like 2 of those if she had time. I would maybe write like 2 to 3 of them, and the rest I would assign out to our interns. One thing that I kind of started taking over for fashion news partway through my time at Nylon was a column called Designer Dispatch, which I loved doing. Again, it was like a very short, fun Q&A with a designer who we thought was cool. Sometimes Marissa would pitch an idea for it. Every once in a while, I would pitch an idea for it. And I absolutely loved doing those interviews. They were just really quick and fun over email. And it was a great way to spotlight a designer who maybe we weren't able to borrow their clothes for a certain issue, or maybe they didn't have like a new collection necessarily or something exciting dropping, but we just wanted to kind of put the spotlight on a designer who we thought was really cool. So I loved doing those. And again, if you guys have any nylon issues from, when would it have been? I guess August 2016 through October 2017, if you check out the fashion news section, you'll definitely see either my name or a little AT. We would usually like spell out someone's byline for the first item like on fashion news, and then if I wrote anything else, I would get like an AT next to it, and that would indicate that was my byline. I think also right around the time I got promoted to assistant editor, I also started writing a bit for beauty news, which I was happy to do because, like I said, our beauty director was basically a one-woman team for a really long time, and B, I was getting much more interested in beauty, and those news features were usually pretty easy for me to whip up, no problem, as long as I had the press release or access to speak to someone at the brand. They usually didn't take more than like maybe a day between the coordination to get the information I need to write, and then another day where I would kind of go back and edit before submitting it to the beauty director for review. 2 of my most noteworthy interviews I got to do for beauty news were with Kaya Gerber and Aubrey Plaza. I got to do both in person, which were so much fun. So Aubrey Plaza was the face of this skincare brand called Pete Rivco that I believe does not exist anymore, but basically her childhood friend started the brand and she became the face of it. And then the Kaya Gerber interview was fun because she became the face of Daisy Mark Jacobs. So I actually got to meet her in person too. And fun fact, she and I share a birthday. We are both September 3rd girls. Usually after fashion news would be either like the fashion market pages, which when I say that, it was basically like the market editor would take flat lays of different pieces that came out and kind of put like a theme around them. So maybe it would be like a graphic tees page or like a handbags page or a denim page or something like that, where she would pull her favorite items from recent collections, kind of put them in a flat lay. We would list like the price, the brand, all of that type of stuff. So it was a little bit more almost like an LTK collage or like a shoppable collage in that sense. And then there would probably be one or two fashion spreads like that were actual photo shoots with themes and concepts that the fashion department would put together. Then there was the beauty section. So that would usually be at least one beauty photo shoot per issue, obviously more if it's like April and it is the beauty issue. Plus, we would have beauty news, and then beauty also had some other kind of subsections. I remember there was one called counterculture, which I believe was like, this is a bad example, but say it's April and it's like an Earth Month theme. Maybe it would be all green packaging products or something like that. Like there would always be some kind of theme or tie-in in that sense. Then I would say the cover story was usually either like right at the halfway point or maybe 2/3 of the way into the issue, of course. And then there would be usually one other long form feature that our features director, Lisa, would assign out. And I think the nylon features were one of the things that made me fall in love with this magazine as a reader, because it was never about something basic is the best way to explain it. I was flipping through some of the old issues that I worked on, and just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, some of those features included a writer who attended an all-female motorcycle rally in South Dakota, an article about macabre, I have such a hard time with this word, macabre culture, like women who were interested in death, essentially. You'll have to look that one up yourself. There was another about a dance studio in Chicago that was combining hip hop and ballet. There was one about a cowgirl beauty pageant one year, and this was actually really funny to source. I remember they did a Diners Across America feature where they basically went to a bunch of different diners all throughout, I guess, primarily like middle America. That must have been for our November issue. Oh, and this might be my favorite. One writer who went to adult space camp and wrote about it. Usually one big feature like that would follow the cover story, and that would usually be assigned out to kind of like one of our go-to freelance writers in our wheelhouse, in our rotation of people who we typically worked with. And then the last section after that in the magazine was Culture Club, like I was saying. So I would often write the art stories. My most notable art interview to date has got to be with Takashi Murakami, who is possibly one of my favorite artists of all time. He is a Japanese artist. If you have ever seen his work, you would recognize it instantly. He is famous for creating characters like Mr. Dobb. He's done collaborations with Louis Vuitton before. He has these flowers that are like extra happy, but underneath all of the very anime style, like happy characters, is a lot of more intense emotion and feeling. And I cannot believe I was able to interview Murakami myself. That is like, if you had told art history major Austen that back in college, I think my jaw would have just hit the floor. Of course, I had to interview him, with a translator since he primarily speaks Japanese, of course, but I did get to do that one in person. That was just like so incredible and exciting for me. I also had gotten to interview the curators of the Whitney Biennial the year right after they moved the museum from the Upper East Side to Chelsea and Meatpacking. So that felt like a very like substantial shift just in energy and what we know the New York art scene to feel like. And I also got to spotlight a lot of other cool exhibitions and galleries all across the country. I did one, I remember, in Nashville. I did one in Chicago, and then another interview that I love that I actually got to fly out to Detroit to conduct in person was with Lala Abadoon, who is an artist that I had met just at a gallery show here in the city. She actually had gotten selected by the Red Bull House of Art, which was this artist residency in Detroit. I'm not sure if they do this anymore since the pandemic, but she was basically one of 3 artists who got chosen to come to Detroit and put on an exhibition and basically like live and work in their space in the Eastern Market neighborhood in Detroit. So that one was cool because they also sent out a photographer, Erin, who I'm still connected to now. And I loved writing that story and like truly getting to bring it all to life in that sense, because typically for the culture club section, again, like I said, I wasn't ever one to like ask for budget because I just had it in my head that we didn't really have a lot of money at Nylon, which I guess kind of turned out to be true since they folded the magazine. So I would typically just use, stock imagery provided by the museum for these articles. So to be able to actually like have a little budget to photograph this story in person was so cool. And I would also sometimes get to write for other culture club sections like food. I remember we did a whole story about ube everything back in 2017, like ube donuts, ube ice cream. That was a really fun one to put together. I also got to interview Billie Joe Armstrong about the Green Day album that came out in 2017. I'm forgetting the name or like which album it was right now, but like me on the phone with Billie Joe Armstrong, like, are you kidding me? That was a big pinch me moment as well. And those would typically be, I would say, like either half page or quarter page features. I remember I also did a short book review for a Joan Didion book that came out that year. So sometimes I would just like jump in with stuff like that whenever they needed me to, but I would usually only do that if it was something I was really interested in outside of art, which was like my responsibility. And that brings us to the back of book, basically the end of the magazine. So some of the back of book pages that I would work on were we would usually have a one page ad that we would like shoot ourselves for the Nylon shop. We used to have a full e-commerce site that was all like connected to Nylon, and it would often be just cool items from brands that like you would sometimes see featured in the magazine, so then you could actually shop directly through us. Actually, I feel like we were really ahead of our time in terms of that. I don't remember any other publication aside from Lucky, which that is such a throwback, that accommodated real-time e-commerce stuff like that. And I would say also often it was a way to kind of get the Nylon girl look for less, just in the sense that like, Nylon called in all different types of brands like Chanel, Fendi. I think our fashion director at the time was dating someone who worked at Chanel, so there was a lot of Chanel and Nylon, I think. But I remember we would always be calling in like these high-end brands, but then in the Nylon shop, we would sell more like up-and-coming brands. I remember I got this amazing pair of boots from the Nylon shop from a brand called Teleport Shoes, and they just had like silver studs all over them. They had like a little V cut out in the boot. Oh my, they were like the perfect Tumblr girl 2017 boots. I absolutely loved those. So anyway, Nylon shop, we would shoot like a full page ad to go in the magazine, and it would say, shop.nylon.com or nylon.com/shop. I don't remember what it was, but that would be at the bottom. But anyway, at the top, there would usually be just like a quick, fun head and one sentence subhead to encourage people to go check out the shop. So I would write that copy. I can't remember for sure. This is why it's like good that I'm doing this now while I remember most things very clearly, but this one I'm not sure about. Nylon had a section called Party Monster, which I know our sales team like basically put together. So when Nylon would throw events like a fashion week party, or I actually just saw on Instagram that they had something at Art Basel Miami this past weekend. Like when we would do events like that, we would gather all of the photos from the event. We would kind of collage them onto this page called Party Monster. And then there would be a little title, like Nylon takes Art Basel or something like that, and a blurb underneath. I feel like sometimes I was asked to write those blurbs. I'm not 100% sure on that though, so don't quote me, but everything else I've said that I've written, I definitely have. I also helped with a page called Shopping List, which thinking about that page in 2024 seems so antiquated for some reason, but it would basically be a list of every brand, every fashion brand, I should say, that was featured in the issue with their website like written out underneath it. The thought of doing that today in anything other than like digital format just gives me a headache. I cannot believe we used to do that for every issue, but we did. And then the final page of every Nylon issue was called Bag Check. This was basically like a cool shot of a purse with all of these fun contents spilling out. And this was put together by our style director, Danny Stahl. So she would pick a purse each month. And, maybe if it was like April, it would have a spring theme to it. Or if it was the It Girl issue, it would be like whatever the really hot, trendy bag was for that year. So the bag would also be spelling out, like a lipstick, sunglasses, keychain, stuff like that from all different brands that basically like Danny just chose. They would photograph that, and then I would write the head and the subhead copy for Bag Check. I would get told like the theme of this is spring or something like that. And then I would put like a little head and a little subhead underneath it. And that is how a magazine is made, and specifically an issue of Nylon magazine, which just will always hold such a special place in my heart. I have all of the issues I worked on, obviously, here in my apartment, but at my parents' house, I have, oh my goodness, years and years of not just Nylon, but like so many other magazines there that were truly like a connection to the world of fashion and New York and so many things for me when I was growing up, and just like dreaming about the day that I would get to work on publications like that and be involved with that in some small way. So the fact that I actually got to live out my magazine editor dream at a time when print still felt like very cool and very important is just something that I will always and forever be so appreciative of. So I hope you guys enjoyed coming behind the scenes with me today as I chatted through basically every single page of an issue and what went into each page every time that we would put an issue together. I guess I should also add, once everyone had stories submitted and edited, everything would basically get added to a mock layout of the magazine, which then would go through the editor who assigned things out to kind of double check everything, make sure everything looked good. And then it would go through a final pass with a copy editor who would check it for grammar. And then it would go through one more final pass with the editor in chief and the design director before it got officially approved and we could ship the issue, meaning send it out to our printer. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. As a reminder, you can support Create and Consume for free by doing any of the following. You can leave Apple and Spotify ratings and reviews. Please, if you enjoyed this episode and you haven't left a review yet, please go take a minute and do it. It would truly make my day, and it really helps the podcast get out to more people, more than you know. You can like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you are watching this episode on YouTube. You can follow at Create and Consume Pod on Instagram and TikTok. You could send this episode to a friend who might enjoy it. And as always, don't forget to check out createandconsumepodcast.com for episode recaps and more. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.